Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll get started.
A girl, while walking down the street on her errands, read a story that was very interesting to her. And in this story, the main character was a guy named Ian Cloud. He was the epitome of a disgusting guy and a classic example of someone whose relationship with whom you just have to regret. In order to show how bad he was, the author of this story said that this guy, ignoring the main character, confessed his love to a completely different girl. And afterward, he also returned the beautiful gift, over which the girl had worked so hard, back to her. He had just taken to leaving poor Diana, who had been visiting him at the estate, unattended for over an hour just because he was busy. And when he rejected his childhood friend Diana and agreed to a marriage that was arranged by his family, one can only imagine how the girl felt at that moment. It is therefore not at all surprising that Diana ran away to the academy immediately after her wedding, as if she were running away from herself. At this point, the girl who read the story couldn't help but wonder the elementary question: why is the main male character like this? She didn't understand why he was acting this way in the first place, nor did she understand what he was doing it for. Certainly he had some backstory, which the author told her about. Namely that Jan Cloud was portrayed as a man who, due to childhood trauma, instinctively pushed others away, even those who were going to help him. And he ended up living his whole life, completely excluding even positive emotions from it. However, just as the girl was about to continue reading the story, she noticed that it had ended. That book she was reading on her phone cut off at the most interesting point, which was when Diana walked over to a crying Ian and kissed him gently. The girl just couldn't understand how the story could end on such a delicate moment. She was curious about what was next, as well as how their relationship would develop. Because she was on the street at that moment, she was not even shy and started shouting loudly. For this reason, people turned around and looked at her, because she started calling the author crazy and did not understand why he had done such a thing. The girl could not understand how this idiot could be forgiven by such a beautiful girl as Diana, because Jan acted simply disgusting, and she did not understand how this could happen. The girl understood perfectly well that she had to say something about it in the comments, but as soon as she went there, she immediately saw that there were only fans of just this Jan. When she read all this, she was incredibly angry. She didn't understand how such people even existed, because this man was truly horrible. Without a doubt, the author of this story is incredibly talented and writes very well as interestingly. However, the girl's whole problem was that all of his talent was directed at just one character, namely Jan. The main character, Diana, was completely devoid of any attention. She was very rarely mentioned in the story, and absolutely everyone knew that he didn't bother to write this character well. He paid all his attention to Ian and wasn't going to spread his energies on the others. So the girl thought it was too much and immediately wrote an angry comment. She didn't understand how Diana could even choose this idiot who didn't pay attention to her at all and had no true feelings for her. The girl thought that if the main character couldn't feel any emotions because of the trauma he had, then he should see a doctor. Therefore, she did not understand why the author made it seem as if it was quite normal. All people immediately supported Ian and said that they were very glad that Diana got together with him after all. However, the girl realized that it was completely wrong. She tried to calm down because she was in a crowded place. At that moment, she started to cross the road and still didn't understand why Diana had done that. Because she was so engrossed in calling the fictional character names, she completely failed to notice that a car was coming at her in the real world, so it hit her. What she was actually thinking at that moment was that, probably like in various stories, when the bus hit her, she might not die permanently, but be reborn. The girl has always been fond of such stories, and usually in such cases, a person who died suddenly finds himself in a novel that just recently read. That was why, while her brain was still working, she wished that if she did get caught up in the story she was reading, she would be sure to crush Jan to avenge his horrible behavior. And in the end, it really happened. As soon as the girl finally lost consciousness, she immediately opened her eyes but was in a completely different place. The girl rather quickly sat down on the bed and, looking around, realized that she was in a completely strange environment. Everything around was very rich. She couldn't believe it was really happening, so she immediately pinched her cheek, and when she did, she felt pain. Then the girl concluded that it really happened. When she was hit by a truck, she died and ended up reincarnated in a completely different place. Her health was fine, so she immediately got out of bed and thought about how she absolutely shouldn't just sit around and wait for something, since she had indeed been reborn. If she really was hit by a truck and reincarnated, she must have gotten, by her own assumptions, into the last novel she read. So at that point, the most important question for her remained one, namely, who she would eventually be reborn into. She went straight to the mirror, which was covered with a sheet. She hoped it wouldn't be Diana because she didn't want to be in her place. Actually wishing happiness for the main character and her lover is one thing, but to possess her body, mind, and do things for her is quite another. Therefore, the girl would absolutely not want to be in this place. And as soon as she saw her reflection in the mirror, she was immediately able to exhale with relief, because it wasn't Diana after all. Then she wondered what she had been reborn as. When she looked more closely, she realized that this place looked very familiar, and that was strange to her. The girl immediately started remembering what she had read and tried to pick the right character to figure out who she had been reborn into after all. And then suddenly she remembered Eliasa Alf. And as soon as the girl realized that she must have really been reborn into this character, she was furious. As she looked around, she confirmed her theory and couldn't believe that she had actually married that guy, just like in the story. The girl was so stunned that she even fell to the floor. It didn't matter at all, no matter how long she thought about it. Now her life, you could say, was over. She was even hysterical, beating her hand on the carpet, not knowing if it all made sense, because she was ready to be some insignificant character. She'd been willing to be a stone in the street rather than the character she'd become. The girl cried, and looking at herself in the mirror, did not understand why it had happened to her. The girl cried and looked at herself in the mirror, not understanding why it had happened to her. And she was actually reborn as Jan Cloud's ex-wife, and it was just humiliating for her. Before long, she finally got a grip on her emotions, and as she stood to her feet, Elise thought about the fact that since it was true, perhaps she wasn't married to him yet. This thought made the girl very happy, and she realized that if still not married, she could do something about it and somehow change her fate. But at that moment, she looked up a little higher and saw that the coat of arms of Jan Cloud's family hung on the wall. This made poor Elise very sad, for she realized that she had married him after all. The girl was incredibly amazed and couldn't believe that she, as a character, had actually married Jan, and that meant that he was now her spouse. She didn't understand why the gods of fate were so cruel to her, and she thought about the fact that becoming John's wife was basically a curse. Because Elise was just incredibly upset, she even started banging her head against the wall as the door to her room suddenly opened. After that, a maid came inside and said that she really didn't see anything, and replied that she had just arrived. The maid was so frightened that she even swore to her that it was true. Elise, hearing this, was very surprised and did not understand what the maid was even talking about, for she had done nothing wrong. Then the girl, smiling, wondered what she was talking about in such a case, and then suddenly felt an incredible energy. Elise thought that it was probably the power of reincarnation. Although her consciousness remained the same, her body did change, and she was now a completely different person. The maid immediately ran up to the girl and told her that it was actually almost breakfast time, so she should go downstairs immediately. When the girl heard this, she was a little surprised, but said that of course she would go, and also took a towel from the maid to wipe her face. Elise remembered that they always had breakfast together with Jan. The girl assumed that it was just so that he would finish all conversations in the morning and not contact her as his wife anymore. She handed the maid a towel and asked that the maid tell her she would be down very soon. The one bowed and said she'd do everything, and Elise thought about how they were really just a couple who strove for efficiency in everything. As soon as the maid was out the door, the girl went straight back to the bed and lay down on it. After that, she sighed heavily. She was still having a hard time accepting the situation that was now her reality. She rolled over onto her other side and realized that since she had said she was coming, she should already be getting ready and going downstairs soon. But she didn't feel like doing that at all. In fact, every time the girl read about Ian's appearance in the novel, his appearance was always very detailed. The author was indeed a vivid fan of the main male character, so he definitely devoted more than 1 hour to him. Soon the girl did pull herself together and, walking out the door, thought about the fact that it didn't matter at all how handsome he was. The first thing she would do would be to spit in his face, showing all her disgust for this man. So Elise went straight to the dining room, where Ian was already sitting at the table. Of course, she had been very enthusiastic just a moment ago, and she wanted to tell him her displeasure to his face. But once she saw his appearance, she was incredibly surprised and couldn't believe that people actually had such a face. She just stood still in amazement. Louise could not believe that this so handsome man was really Ian Cloud. She realized that this was madness, but now she was beginning to guess why the author had described his looks so highly. After all, he really was stunning. As soon as the man noticed that the girl had gone inside and was just standing there looking at him, he immediately looked up and asked what had happened, and wondered if she had come just to stand there the whole time. Louise, upon hearing these words, immediately remembered that this guy had another nickname as well, namely, that he was a tyrant prince, or the very real demon prince who loves no one and treats everyone just disgustingly. The man, sighing heavily, told his wife that if she didn't want breakfast, she could safely go back upstairs and not waste his time. Louise said with a smile on her face that of course she would eat, and thought to herself that this beautiful voice was making the situation even more confusing and complicated. Soon she took her seat. Then the man put his fork aside and addressed her, not even by name, but simply calling Elise his wife. Ian looked at her seriously and said that if she kept looking at him like that, she certainly wouldn't hurt him. The girl, hearing this, became very angry and thought that if he was going to continue to use his voice just to show his disrespect, it would be better for him not to open his mouth at all. Of course, she didn't say anything like that to him, but only remained silent. There was a very awkward pause between them, but the girl went on with her meal. She found it very hard to believe that really Jan and Eloise had breakfast together like this absolutely every day. There was actually an incredibly large amount of food on the plate, and she thought about how they probably had very strong stomachs since she had never eaten so much before. When the girl started her meal, she looked down for a while, but then she looked up at Jan and didn't understand why the man had dressed up so much since morning. She also speculated that perhaps he was going somewhere on important business. Ian doesn't usually work so hard on his appearance unless it's a very important event for him. A while later, the man turned to the girl again and said that she looked like she was about to tell him something, so he asked her to get to the point. Eloise was angry when she heard this, but she tried to keep her emotions to herself. Then she said she was just wondering if he was going out that day. Ian, hearing such questions, immediately rolled his eyes and sighed heavily. The girl realized that she could read the expression on this guy's face like a book. Getting up from behind his seat, he said that this day was just when the monthly meeting in the Imperial Palace was held. Louise was very surprised when she heard this, for she did not think she could be reborn just on this important day. In fact, as one can understand, Jan carried the blood of the royal family, for he possessed a rather high title. More specifically, he was the half-brother of the emperor himself. This kind of situation usually led to a bloody rivalry between the two brothers. However, that emperor who was the ruling emperor had always loved Jan since he was a child. And a guy who had shown exceptional talent in fencing and martial arts from a young age became the youngest sword fencing master at the age of 18 without even having a suitable teacher. Instead of being cautious about Yang's abilities, The emperor simply admired him and never stopped praising his skills. He even gave him the title of special advisor to the imperial knights. Thus, it seemed to the girl that the author wanted to give Jan absolutely all the wealth and honors that existed in that world. She understood that this was not just singling out a man as a favorite, but the very real disease, in her opinion. At this point, Ian said that he would be heading there already, and the girl didn't understand why he repeated it, since it was exactly what he had been talking about before he got up from his seat. But after that, the man also added that he would be returning rather late that day. Eloise was very annoyed by this precision, but she replied that of course she understood. The man, passing by her, said that she knew him very well. The girl turned around and looked at him, unable to tell if he was being sarcastic. But before Jan was quite out of the door, he stopped, and turning to his wife, addressed her. The man made an even prettier face and said that it didn't matter at all how good the food was, she should still remove the sauce from her face while eating. When the girl heard this, she couldn't believe that he had actually said such a thing. She thought about the fact that if he wasn't the ultimate sword master, she would have definitely hit him at that moment. But miraculously, she managed to restrain herself. In fact, Louise was the second daughter of the Marquis of Alpha and one of the top 10 founding families of the Levantine Empire. She was also called the flower of the social scene. However, due to her unique character, the girl was also often said to be the Ice Princess and Ice Flower Marquis. Her marriage to Yang was solely for the benefit of her family, and since the interests of both parties were perfectly aligned, they received the full support of the emperor to proceed with the marriage. Louise was just a useful pawn in this whole gameplay of their parents. Her father talked about her marriage being an incredibly large price to pay to expand the family business. If she didn't, he wouldn't be able to find profit anywhere else to advance their family business. And the Marquis, who sold his daughter for business, showed just how much he valued business more than his own daughter. Some time had passed since that breakfast, and the girl came into the office to sort things out a bit. She was going to think first of all about the fact that she knew she was living in the 273rd imperial year. The girl also remembered that Ian and Louise had married in March 2 years ago, so it had been exactly 2 years and 2 months since then. Suddenly she realized that in this case the term newlywed did not suit them at all, because they had been together for quite a long time. Well, for what it's worth, Diana is due back in the summer of that very year. That means there's not much time left. The girl was simply desperate. She realized that if she had reincarnated at will, she would have done it before the marriage or after the divorce. So Louise had absolutely no idea why she had been abandoned at exactly the 2-year mark of her marriage. And that time was indeed far worse than any other. Of course, she absolutely does not want to mess with Diana in this way either, and only wanted to help her so that she would not cross paths with Ian in any way. In any case, given the situation, Louise realized that she would have to end it all within a year. She wanted to do it a little early, because 6 months after Diana's return to history, this marriage would dissolve anyway. So she saw no point in waiting too long for the inevitable. Ian realizes his true feelings, unilaterally demands a divorce from Louise, and the girl will be left with nothing else. She simply has to sign this contract, however she doesn't do it right away. And throughout that 6 months, Diana suffers a lot because of the way the man treats her. Louise was ready to cry because she was the cause of all this. She even thought for a moment that it would be best for her to die. She wanted to make things as quick and easy as possible, because this way she would just become a burden and a big test for her most favorite character in the story. Then Louise could no longer hold back her tears, and as she cried, she thought that if she could get a divorce within a year and disappear before Diana returned, maybe things wouldn't be so bad. Suddenly, she saw a very interesting paper on her desk and thought that this could be her opportunity. She still had about a year left before Diana would return, and if the girl could use her position as Grand Duchess during that time, Eloise thinks she can correct Jan's behavior one by one. The girl was very serious and thought about the fact that she might not be able to turn it into a luxury car, but at least she could get it out of the junk category. Once Eloise thought it over carefully, She realized that it was a really great idea, and it was the only right decision for her. Before Diana returns to the country, she rehabilitates this hopeless Jan and turns him into a perfect gentleman who will be a perfect match for Diana. In fact, as well as Louise knows Diana, she also knows Ian, that horrible idiot. And all because she had been rereading this story several times over a great deal of time, for she was very interested in it. So the girl, who was incredibly serious, asked that Diana wait for her. She was ready to fix Jan, even if she had to communicate with him for a very long time. Also, the girl was going to show Diana that even trash could be repaired and used eventually. Immediately afterwards, the girl called a maid to her. The maid was very shy, but she came quickly and asked the girl in a quiet voice if she had called her. Louise said that was indeed true and asked what her name was. She asked if she could remind her. The maid, bowing, said her name was Bibi. The girl, hearing this, immediately thought that her character was also very indifferent. You see, she saw the behavior of the maids and the other servants. The girl realized this because it was completely unsurprising to a maid who had worked with her for over 2 years that her mistress inquired about her name. But she thought of fixing the situation with the servants later. So she immediately said that the reason she had summoned Bibi was because she had heard a very interesting story. The maid, when she heard about it, was immediately interested and asked what the story was, because the mistress had never even said such a thing before. Then, too, Louise said that there had been quite a buzz in the capital lately. Everyone was talking about Eloise and Jan. So she wondered why the maid had said absolutely nothing about the rumors that had been circulating about them in the capital. When the maid heard this, she was very surprised and asked how such a thing was even possible. But the girl laughed at this point and wondered, did she really ask something so difficult? Bibi immediately said that not at all. It was just that these rumors weren't worth bothering Madame at all, which was why she felt it wasn't necessary to tell. Louise asked in surprise, were there any other rumors she didn't need to hear about? The maid replied that there were not, and that there was certainly nothing more. The girl also replied that she absolutely did not want to repeat what she had just said, and added that she wanted to hear about the scandals that involved her and the Grand Duke because it was pretty important. Bibi fell to her knees at this point and said that she didn't want to talk about these scandals at all, so she asked that the girl just kill her instead. She, smiling, immediately told the maid that she promised that she would absolutely not punish or scold her for what she said, for the mistress understood everything, that it was only a rumor. Bibi looked at her with tearful eyes and wondered, is it really true? The girl replied that this was certainly true. However, if she continued to remain silent, she might find herself frustrated that Bibi was forcing her away from her. The maid was silent for a while, her hands trembling with worry. But soon she began her story. Bibi said that she had heard people refer to the girl as nothing more than an entourage of the Grand Duke's property, and some also called her the ghost of the Grand Duchy of Clouds. When Louise heard about all this, she was a little surprised that they actually called her that, but she should have expected such a thing, of course. In fact, this was a completely common situation, something that a typical noblewoman would faint on the spot if she heard it, but Louise was absolutely not such a person, so she reacted calmly to such a thing. The maid put her head down again, and turning to the lady, said that she had committed a grievous sin, so she could certainly punish her for it at once. But Eloise, smiling, immediately said that of course she would not do that, for she had simply asked for the maid to say those words to her, so it was not her fault at all. The lady also smiled and thanked her for telling her the whole truth. The girl said that it was very valuable for her, and also added that Bibi was a great girl. When the maid heard all this, she looked at her mistress in surprise and couldn't believe that she was the one actually saying such words. She then got to her feet and thanked her mistress for being so generous, and added that in that case she would leave her right now so as not to disturb the girl. As soon as Bibi walked out the door, Louise immediately sighed heavily and thought about what people called her. At this point, she felt just awful and thought about the fact that Jan Claude was now all but dead. His reputation was deteriorating by the day. In fact, the girl in her past life was exactly what she was called from a very young age. Her life was filled with different genres, and she was a so-called keyboard warrior. And all because every time she encountered a popular fandom on social media, she became simply annihilating. The girl read it and defended her point of view in the comments, so she was disliked by many. So Eloise can certainly withstand now even various unfavorable conditions, because in her past life, she had to go through a lot of things. The girl walked over to the window and thought about how she completely disliked those annoying mainstream fandoms that flooded the entire internet. After enduring such hardships for a whole 10 years, her spiritual strength became much stronger than anyone else's, because people on the internet can be very cruel. However, Yang Claude was not that kind of person at all. He was incredibly stubborn, like a devil, and always defended only his own opinion. Yet he has not overcome the traumas of his childhood, despite his persistence. And if a man has suppressed his emotions for almost 30 years, it is immediately clear what kind of person he is now. Of course, at that point, all the words and bad intentions were directed at Eloise. However, if things continue like this, some of these rumors could turn into an accusation against Diana. The girl thought about the fact that she couldn't just let it all go, because she wanted the best for Diana. So she was going to come up with a plan to fix this situation somehow. Louise thought about the fact that Diana only had to wait a little while, because she would be sure to teach Ian a good lesson, and all those people who might think something bad about their couple. When evening came, the man was sitting in his office when suddenly someone knocked on his door. He immediately said it was okay to come in. After that, the door opened and a man walked into the room, much to Jan's surprise, and all because it was Eloise. He looked at her in surprise and wondered what she was doing in his office so late. The girl, smiling happily, said she had something she wanted to talk to him about. She was incredibly annoyed, however, because he thinks he's some kind of Napoleon who sleeps less than 4 hours a night and never rests. So she thought that if he continued at this pace, he would die quite young. Ian, looking sternly at the girl, said that he thought they had agreed not to disturb each other outside of breakfast unless it was something very special and urgent. So he inquired, was it so urgent that it could not wait until tomorrow morning for them to discuss the subject at breakfast? Eloise was very indignant when she heard this, but she restrained her anger and said that it was indeed something special. The man went back to looking at his papers and immediately asked what it was then. The girl immediately put some papers on his desk and said she had heard some of the names people called her in the community. Ian immediately took one paper and began to scrutinize it. But afterward he asked what she wanted him to do, for he really didn't understand why she had come to him with such a thing. The girl had a happy smile on her face, but she was completely unhappy and thought that he was a real idiot, just as she had expected. Louise wondered if he was completely unaware of what people were saying about her. Ian looked at her in surprise and asked, should he really be so concerned about her reputation and even keep up with all this news? The girl was very surprised and said that they said that about the Grand Duchess and wondered, did he really not care what bad things were said about his wife? Ian, sighing heavily, said that he didn't think it was his responsibility, so of course he didn't get involved in these matters. But Louise replied that all these rumors concerned him too, and not only her. She thought of what he might say now, but to her surprise, the man didn't say anything. He just ignored it. So the girl, smiling happily, told him to think carefully and asked him if he really had no reason to worry. Then with a heavy sigh, he said he didn't care at all what anyone said about him and asked that the girl get to the point as soon as possible, what she wanted him to do or say. Louise was very surprised that he was actually doing that. His wife had become the head of the whole capital's rumors, and he didn't care about it at all. He didn't apologize in any way and wasn't going to fix the situation. Mentally, she kept reassuring herself and cursing Jan with every possible curse because she didn't love him with all her soul. She was silent for a while and then, folding her arms across her chest, she said that no matter how beneficial this marriage was to their families, she could no longer live like this. Jan, hearing such a statement, was immediately interested. He looked at her and said that she must have some other solution to this matter. Without waiting for her response, he said that if she was now going to talk about cliches about what his heart wanted, he could stop immediately, because he wasn't going to listen to all of that. When Louise heard his assumption, she was very surprised and asked him not to even joke about such things, because she was not interested in it at all. The girl was disgusted even at the thought that he could have suggested such a thing. You see, she hated this man with all her soul. However, Jan, hearing her reply, was immediately surprised and inquired as to what, in that case, she had to offer. The girl put her hand on the table and turned to him, wondering if he'd ever heard of people not being able to change. Of course, Ian was initially starting to dislike the idea, and he had no idea what she was even talking about. But the girl smiled happily and told him that she did not believe that statement at all. And then, moving closer to him, she said that she would change him from now on. Ian was very surprised to hear this. He didn't even think that his wife could be so assertive because he hadn't noticed it from her before. After the girl said her wish, there was an awkward silence between them again. No one knew what they should say in a situation like this. As Jan processed this information, he wondered with irritation in his voice, was she really going to change him? Louise, smugly saying that it was all true, added that she would change him in ways that he might not even hope for any other way. The man was shocked and asked what she was even talking about, and how dare she even suggest that he could agree to such a thing. She also said that it seemed to her that he possessed no hope at all, for in only 2 years the man had turned a girl who had been dubbed the flower of the public stage into the ghost of the Grand Duchy. When Ian heard this, he was incredibly stunned. He didn't think that the girl had such an opinion of him. Louise, seeing how surprised he was, thought that he didn't know the worst yet. So the most interesting things were ahead of him. She also turned to him and said that she didn't really expect very much from him, so he shouldn't worry. The girl explained that she just wanted him to maintain enough of the Grand Duchess's dignity, that's all. Louise thought about the fact that he shouldn't be bothered at all, as she had no desire to get anywhere near him in any way. She was going to polish him up, rehabilitate him, and then just disappear for Diana's sake. The girl said, as he could tell from the papers, everyone had started calling her a ghost and a void. Some even say she's just a piece of furniture in the Grand Duchy. Until now, she had quietly tolerated it out of respect for His Majesty, the Emperor, and her father. However, when it escalated, she realized that she could no longer tolerate such behavior. Ian listened to her. However, he didn't want to make eye contact lest she realize what he was thinking. Louise kept talking and said that, to be honest, it wasn't just her problem, so she thought they should sort it out together. Without a doubt, Jan had royal blood as well as the blessing of the Emperor himself, and no rumor of his marriage would be able to shake his honor. However, the girl was also a human being, and she certainly did not like to hear terrible things being said about her, not even justified. The man pondered her words for a while, and then asked, since when did she become concerned about such statements? Because the capital is always abuzz with such rumors. Eloise then replied to him that even if he closed his ears and eyes, he could still hear it, because society enjoyed discussing other people's private lives so much that they just couldn't stop anymore. Also, smiling, she added that she planned not to bother him for very long, so she suggested setting the duration at exactly a year to get things right. In fact, even an idiot would realize that if things continue as they are, soon all this harm will be gone and only the good will remain. Eloise said, provided he, the Grand Duke, made the effort, and her reputation never changed in all that time, it would only be his fault. She said if nothing could change, she would give up too and not deal with it at all. Jan looked at her disdainfully and wondered what she meant by deal with, and the girl explained that it meant that she would live quietly, as if she were dead altogether. She added that if he wanted to, of course, she could divorce him as well. She also added that it would actually be very convenient for them. Jan, hearing about the divorce, was very surprised and asked, did she really think about such a thing? But Louise replied that it was indeed a good option. After all, he would need someone to take over as Grand Duchess. She also added that as Grand Duke, he would certainly have many opportunities, and if he thought there was no need to continue this marriage, she was more than willing to step aside and not get in the way. After all this, as long as the new Grand Duchess is capable, absolutely anyone would be suitable for the position. Louise, smiling, said that perhaps after they parted, he would find someone more suitable than her for the position of Grand Duchess, and that would indeed be the right thing to do. In fact, whatever the result, under any circumstances, the girl was going to file for divorce from Jan within a year. And after that, Diana would return already in the role of the new Grand Duchess. The girl thought that she had made herself quite clear, but she also decided to say that before she became Grand Duchess, she was still a person with her own dignity. And that's why she absolutely doesn't want to spend the rest of her life with such a derogatory label hung on her. So Eloise really hoped that he would cooperate with her after all. When the man heard about the cooperation, he was very surprised. Undoubtedly, from the outside, it could seem that the girl was declaring war on him. However, when she completed everything she had planned, then Ian would have nothing to lose from this proposal, so he would definitely have to agree. Then the man, looking her straight in the eye, inquired if she possessed a detailed plan for this year, which she wished to present to all that she had in mind. Louise put her hand on the table and said that of course she would have to make a plan from now on. First, however, she would like to suggest 2 things to him. She voiced them at once. First, she would like him to treat her as his lawful wedded wife, at least in public. At home it is not necessary to do so. And her second demand was that he spend a certain amount of time with her each week as part of his mental training. When Jan heard that he was to spend time with her, he was very surprised and asked what he would have to do there in that case. The girl explained that people change if left alone, so he would have to spend time with her in order for the others to suspect absolutely nothing, and also to improve him in that regard. In fact, before Diana could return, she needed to completely reshape Ian's mindset in order for him to no longer be that sullen man. Louise had heard before that the stricter the method of education, the more effective it is. So she decided to test this theory on the re-education of her man. They were silent for a while, then put their heads down. She said that she had told him that he was beyond hope, so he should think of it as a class to just learn in. Ian, digesting all this information, looked at the girl and asked, "Did she really mean it?" Louise suddenly started yelling at him and wondered if he really thought she had so much time on her hands that she would come into his office at night and just play jokes on him. He didn't react to that in any way. And then he thought about the fact that if it was all just for 1 year, he might be okay with it. The Jan said that, as far as he remembered, whether her reputation changed or not, in a year's time everything would be back to the way it was before. The girl, smiling, said that it was all true, and those were her terms. But in fact he had no idea that she was going to re-educate him. But the man didn't need to know that. Then he looked at the paper she handed him and said that a weekend evening should be enough to spend time with her. When she heard this, of course, she was outraged and said that 1 day off would be totally insufficient, so she suggested that they expand a little on aspects of their time together. Of course, Louise said, if he had other plans, they could change the schedule. At this point, however, she wanted him to let her take at least 3 days. Of course, Jan didn't like all this and said that it would just be a waste of time. But the girl, objecting, replied that he probably wanted her to retell him every rumor one by one until it finally reached him. Jan, of course, wasn't ready for that. So with a heavy sigh, he said that in that case, he wanted to make just 1 day on the weekend for her to do whatever she wanted. When Eloise heard this, she was immediately happy and said that everything was fine. In that case, they would see each other at the weekend. Of course, her original goal was 1 weekend, so that's what she calls great negotiation skills. Turning around, the girl started to leave. But before she walked out the door, she said that she would leave this newspaper as a gift to him, so he could read it when he got bored. The next day, when morning came, the girl woke up quite early, and there was an immediate knock on her room by Bibi. Louise allowed her to enter, and the girl, bowing, inquired if she had slept well last night, and added that she would help her prepare for breakfast. However, the girl replied that it was completely unnecessary, for she would not go there that day. When Bibi heard this, She was very surprised and asked how it was possible. But Eloise, too, smiling, told her to get the butler and get ready to leave. The maid was incredibly surprised by such requests and asked, "Is it really necessary to prepare everything right now?" And the lady replied that it was right now because she would be leaving very soon, so everything should be ready. But without thinking long, Bibi turned around and started to run away, saying that she would get everything ready right away to make sure everything went well. Louise sat back and smiled contentedly. She thought that the negotiations that had taken place the previous evening had been a success. However, she also realized that there was no need to have breakfast with Jan every morning because they now had a certain amount of time to spend together. So the girl just didn't understand why on earth they should force themselves to eat together if they didn't even want to see each other. Some time had passed since then, and the maid finally returned. She asked the mistress if they could come in, and the girl, with a smile on her face, of course said they could. Then the door opened, and several other maids came into the room. Bibi turned to them and said that since the mistress was leaving this afternoon, she should see that the girl was dressed even more elegantly than usual. One of the maids then approached the girl and inquired whether she wished to gather or loose her hair that day. Louise answered her preference. Then another maid came up to her and told her that if she was going to go out on the main street, she would have to walk a lot, so she would choose comfortable low-heeled loafers instead of high heels. The maid also said that she was tall, so even in low heels she would look stunning. Louise felt rather strange, for she had just asked the maid to prepare her to go out. However, she was more excited than even the girl herself. Of course, mistress thought she would just put something on and leave. However, Bibi had prepared a whole ceremony for that. Some time had passed since then, and a man knocked at her room. He said his name was Gerald, and the girl let him in. It was the butler. He inquired if she had summoned him. The girl said with a smile on her face that that was correct. She was planning to take the main street, so she asked that he get ready for it. Harold was a little surprised when he heard this, but said that of course he would prepare everything, for she was going out for the first time in a long time. Louise, smiling, said that she wanted him to prepare 2 blank checks for her immediately. At that moment, the maid had already run up to her to deal with her hair. When the herald heard about the checks, he was even more surprised and asked, did she really need them? The girl did not understand what he was so surprised about and asked why he looked so shocked and wondered if he meant to say that he could not give them to her. The butler at once replied that of course he would make them now and also inquired about breakfast. Louise turned away to the mirror and said she wasn't interested at all, so she thought he should inform the prince. She did not understand. Was there some disease in this family that fatally demanded that the spouses eat breakfast together? They all looked so surprised when she told them she wasn't coming. Eloise was going to let him eat alone and see if he liked it. So the butler soon came to the gentleman and told him that the girl had said she would not arrive at breakfast time. When he heard that, he was a little surprised, but said that in that case he would go already too. The butler, bowing, said that it was very good and left him. Ian didn't understand what was going on and why the girl didn't show up for breakfast. He didn't understand how this was even possible, since last night she had burst into his office and started talking about something, and this morning she hadn't shown up for breakfast. Then suddenly he remembered her words when she had said that if he wished, she could divorce him. Ian didn't like all this. He put his fork aside and thought about the fact that it all really annoyed him. He didn't understand why the girl couldn't behave as usual, and why she had to make up some strange new rules. Soon the girl was finally completely ready, and as soon as she stepped outside, she noticed that the weather was marvelous. Of course she couldn't go without an escort, so she took Bibi with her, and as soon as they arrived, the maid asked her mistress if she was really going to see the seamstress. Louise, smiling, said that of course she would go there, and inquired if the girl had brought everything she had asked for. The maid, smiling, said she had certainly brought all the blank checks and certificates as the girl had asked. Louise thanked her and said she was a great girl. Then Bibi sighed heavily and said that it was the first time she had ever seen a girl go to the seamstress, so it surprised her a little. When the girl heard this, she immediately realized that this was probably the case. In fact, the reason she had come to the shopping district so early was completely different. She did so only to smooth the path of Diana, who would be arriving quite soon. So the moment Louise decided to live in this world, she can't just sit in the mansion all day. She has to do something, otherwise she won't survive. When the maid turned to her and inquired if they would be leaving already, and the girl cheerfully went forward and said that they really should be going by now. She was willing to do absolutely anything to make Diana happy, because she was her favorite character, and Eloise just couldn't let anything bad happen. And so her first assignment was this understanding of capital flow. The girl believed that if you know your enemy, you also know yourself, in which case you can win absolutely every battle and soon win the war. In the place she had gotten to, and in that era, clothing stores were incredibly important to society. So the first thing she decided to do was to go to one of those stores. The clothing stores where the higher-ups congregate are the source and center of all rumors. So the first thing Eloise had to do was to be there to see what people were saying in general. Of course, it is not even an exaggeration to say that every news in the capital passes exactly through the clothing store. The social cycle is like an amicable relationship, only without the swords, so Eloise was very good at it, so she already had her strategy worked out. They soon came into some dark alley, and Bibi, turning to Madame, inquired, had she not said she would go directly to the seamstress? The girl immediately stopped and said she had said so, and the maid replied that there were no other seamstresses in this alley. But Louise, smiling, told her not to worry too much about it. Just follow her and everything would be fine. Of course, her destination had been determined from the beginning. So soon they came to a dark door, and stopping there, the lady said she thought the place she wanted to go was just beyond those doors. Bibi was beginning to get a little worried. She wondered if Madame really wanted to be in that place. But the girl didn't understand if there was any reason why she should leave there. After all, she thought it was safe. And all the more reason for her to go there. Bibi said in a trembling voice that, of course, if she was going to order a dress, she had better visit Veronique's dress store in the main street, for it was the largest in the capital and there was a very good selection. But at this point, Eloise became very angry, and turning to her maid, she said that she had not asked her opinion on the matter at all. The maid realized that she had started to cross a bit of a line and thus angered her mistress, so she immediately apologized and was silent. Then the girl turned toward the intimidating door and thought about the fact that this clothing store might be on the verge of failure, but it was the only store she could go to at that moment. This place was definitely not just an ordinary clothing store, and Louise certainly knew that. So after gathering her courage, she opened the door and stepped inside. Soon the owner of the store came out to them, and seeing the girls, she immediately asked who they were, because she did not often have guests. Eloise immediately said hello to the shopkeeper. Her name was Madame Zed, and when she looked more closely at her visitor, she knew she was the princess. She came close to her and was very frightened at her address. So bowing, she immediately said that she was very glad to welcome her to her store. The girl in turn said that she had come to see her dresses. Madame Zed, hearing this, was very surprised and asked, "Is it really true?" But the lady, smiling, replied that she would like to get it all sorted out as soon as possible. And so the shopkeeper followed the girl to help her with her choice. Soon they were standing near a large rack with many different dresses on it, and Madame Zed said that this was the entire assortment that she had in her store, and said that she was ashamed to say that they did not have the same budget, and she could not offer her more, unfortunately. Eloise said with a smile that she understood everything, so she wasn't angry at all, because she knew where she was going. In fact, these designs were definitely ahead of their time, and when she saw these dresses, she knew perfectly well that she had not made a wrong choice at all. In about 6 months, thanks to the accidental discovery of a princess, Madame Zed's clothing store will become an incredibly big success. And a year later, Madame Z will be of tremendous help to Diana when she finally returns, and Diana will major in shoe fashion design at the academy. And the girl herself will be her main assistant and business partner in this case. So Diana and the owner of this store will closely cooperate with each other. In the original story, Diana made every effort to get Zed on her side. But if Eloise takes care of the store now, it'll be less difficult for Diana. And besides, it's a good opportunity to create her own source of information. The girl stood looking at the outfits all this time, thinking about it. Then the shopkeeper suddenly approached her and asked if she was all right. Louise realized that she was very quiet, so they were beginning to suspect something, so she immediately turned to her and waved her head. Then Mrs. Z said that if she really didn't like those dresses, she could something more suitable for her taste. If she would just give it a chance, it would be fine. But the girl replied that there was absolutely no need for it. When the landlady heard this, she was immediately upset. She realized that she had missed her chance. But then suddenly Eloise said it was all because she would buy all the clothes in her store, including even the accessories. Zed, hearing this, was very surprised. Just like her maid, the shopkeeper asked, did she really mean that she was going to buy absolutely everything in her store? Louise smiled happily and said that it was true. Then the lady asked if there was any particular reason for it had never happened to her before. The princess replied that she thought that a noblewoman needed no reason at all for choosing a dress, and she had really just come to buy the whole range in this store. Zed couldn't contain her surprise and emotion. She turned to Mistress and asked if she wanted her to make any changes to the design of the outfits. In fact, in the original story, Madame Z was a very good designer and took pride in all of her work. As a result, she often refused requests to change the design. Generally speaking, she was very stubborn, which caused her business to collapse. So when the girl heard Madame Z suggest such a thing, she knew her store was in big trouble. So Eloise said, smiling, that there was absolutely no need to change the design. She just wanted it changed to make everything fit her body size, and that was the end of it. The lady then turned to Bibi and asked that the girl give her what she had prepared. The maid immediately opened the suitcases and handed the mistress some checks, saying she had everything ready. Then Eloise, smiling happily, turned to Bibi and asked her to write down all the items, without omitting anything, on this unfilled check and take it to the Grand Duke's estate. Also, the girl said that from now on, she will sponsor Zed's clothing store under the name of Duchess. So now she doesn't have to worry about financial difficulties at all.